I'm Samuel, I'm 32 years old, and this house was supposed to be the first chapter of my own story. It turns out my family had already decided they were going to write it for me. Before I tell you about the moment on Sunday that changed everything, the moment I finally took back my life, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The first thing I noticed was the car. A familiar, 10-year-old sedan. Its paint faded in the same spots I'd memorized since high school, parked right in my new driveway as if it belonged there. My heart did a painful lurch in my chest, a sudden, violent thud against my ribs. I had owned this house for exactly 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks of quiet, blissful solitude, I hadn't told a single soul in my family. Not my mother, not my father, and certainly not my older brother, Leo. This place wasn't just a secret. It was my sanctuary. I killed the engine and just sat there, the sudden silence of my car amplifying the frantic pounding in my ears. A wave of denial washed over me. It's fine. They were just in the neighborhood. It's a coincidence. But I knew better. In the complex, unspoken language of my family, there were no coincidences. There were only calculated moves, strategic advances into my territory. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm the tremor in my hands, I got out and walked up the stone path I had chosen myself. The front door was slightly ajar, a dark sliver of invitation that felt like a threat. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This was a violation. I pushed it open, and there they were, standing in the middle of my living room, bathed in the afternoon light I had fallen in love with, as if they were reviewing a property for sale. My father, Richard, was running his hand along the smooth plaster of the wall, his brow furrowed in that perpetually critical way he had. My mother, Eleanor, was peering into the kitchen, her lips pursed as she mentally rearranged my cabinets. And in the center of it all, commanding the space with an effortless arrogance, was my brother, Leo. He turned to me, and there was absolutely no surprise on his face. Just a calm, entitled certainty that set my teeth on edge. He smiled, a lazy, charming smile that had disarmed teachers, girlfriends, and loan officers his entire life. "Hey, Sammy," he said, his voice as smooth as polished marble. He gestured around the room, a king surveying his new domain. "Not bad. A little plain, but it's got good bones." My mother glided over, her movements practiced and graceful, placing a cool hand on my arm. "Samuel, dear, why didn't you tell us? It's a lovely place. A bit big for just one person, though, don't you think?" Her words were light, but the meaning was heavy. I finally found my voice, but it came out tight, strained. "What are you all doing here?" Leo chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves. He was already walking towards the hallway, peering into the spare bedroom I had planned to use as a home office. He nodded to himself, a small, decisive gesture. "This works," he said, more to himself than to me. He then turned, his gaze locking with mine, and delivered the line that would detonate the next week of my life. "This works for me. I'll move in this weekend." There was no question in his tone, no hint of a request. It was a royal decree, a decision made about my life in my house without my consent. I just stood there, my car keys digging so deep into my palm I could feel the sharp edges threatening to break the skin. I stayed silent, but that silence wasn't agreement. It wasn't weakness. It was the deep, cold intake of breath before the storm. Before I tell you what happened on that fateful Sunday, I need you to understand why a locked door could mean more than just security. For me, it meant a lifetime. To understand that Sunday, you have to understand my brother, Leo. Leo wasn't just my older brother. He was the sun around which our family planet obediently orbited. From the moment he was born, my mother, Eleanor, declared him special. "He was sensitive," she'd say, her voice hushed with reverence. "He's an artist. He just feels things more deeply than the rest of us." In reality, this meant Leo was a delicate instrument, and it was the rest of our jobs to be his tireless, uncredited roadies, making sure his world never had any sharp edges. I remember being 8 years old and pouring my soul into a model of the solar system for the school science fair. It was my masterpiece. I'd spent a month on it, using marbles for the planets, painstakingly painting them with my dad's model car paint until they shimmered under my desk lamp. Saturn's rings were made from a carefully cut piece of a plastic lid. It was perfect. The night before it was due, Leo, who was 13 and in his brooding poet phase, decided he needed my desk to sketch. I told him no, that my project was there and I couldn't move it. He got angry. His face clouded over, and that familiar sense of entitlement flared in his eyes. There was a shove, a brief, clumsy struggle, and then the sickening crash of balsa wood and shattering glass. My miniature solar system was a pile of cosmic debris on my bedroom floor. I was gutted. Tears streamed down my face. When my parents rushed in, my mother saw me sobbing over the wreckage and Leo standing there with a defiant scowl. Her first words weren't, "Leo, what did you do?" They were, "Samuel, why on earth did you upset your brother? You know how he gets when he's trying to be creative." Leo mumbled something about me being selfish with the desk, and that was it. The official family narrative was written in that moment. I was the difficult one, the rigid one, the one who didn't understand the needs of a burgeoning genius. My father just stood in the doorway, a silent, disapproving statue. His silence was a language I learned to speak fluently before I even hit double digits. It meant it's just easier this way. I ended up getting a C on the project, my teacher looking at me with disappointment. Leo got a new, expensive set of charcoal pencils the next weekend to soothe his frayed artistic nerves. That was the blueprint for our childhood. If Leo failed a test, the teacher was a Philistine. If he got into a fight, the other kid was a bully who didn't understand him. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. My straight A's were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." My struggles were met with a dismissive, "You'll figure it out, Samuel. You always do." I learned to stop asking for help, then to stop asking for anything at all. I learned to build my life in the shadows cast by my golden boy brother, a place where the sun never quite reached. My Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, would visit and pinch my cheek, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "You're such a good boy, Samuel. Always looking out for your big brother." Even then, I knew it wasn't a compliment. It was a life sentence. The small, corrosive injustices of childhood eventually hardened into life-altering sacrifices in my teenage years. The first event that truly fractured my world happened when I was 17. Leo, then 22, had come home for the weekend from one of the many colleges he'd attended and dropped out of. He borrowed my dad's car to go to a party. He came back long after midnight, reeking of cheap beer, the front bumper of the sedan crumpled like a discarded piece of tinfoil. He'd sideswiped a neighbor's parked car and just driven off. A hit and run. The next morning, the kitchen air was so thick with tension I could barely breathe. My mother was making coffee, her movements jerky, her hands trembling. My father was staring out the window at the damaged car, his jaw muscle twitching. Leo sat at the table, the picture of pathetic remorse, staring at his hands. My mother sat down next to me, her face pale. "Samuel," she began, her voice a soft, desperate plea. "The police were here. Mrs. Gable down the street got the license plate." She took my hand, her skin cold and clammy. "Leo, they could press charges. He could lose his scholarship. He could get a criminal record. His whole future?" She trailed off, letting the unspoken catastrophe hang between us. "It was just a mistake," my father said, finally turning from the window. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor. A stupid, youthful mistake. Then came the proposal, the moment that would poison our relationship forever. Since I was a minor, 17, with a squeaky clean record, the consequences for me would be minimal. A fine, they said. Maybe some community service. It would just be a slap on the wrist for you, Sammy? Leo chimed in, his voice cracking with a sincerity that was so fake it was insulting. For me, it could ruin everything. My whole life. They asked me to say I was the one driving, to take the fall for him, to lie to the police, to a judge, to our neighbors. I remember looking from my mother's pleading face to my father's averted gaze. begging him with my eyes to be a father, to put a stop to this insanity, to say this was wrong. He just shook his head slightly, a gesture of helpless defeat. My mother's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. For the family, Samuel. We have to protect the family. I did it. I swallowed the lie, and it felt like swallowing glass. I took the blame. And just as they predicted, it was a hefty fine and a series of mandatory safe driving classes filled with other teenagers. But the real cost wasn't the money or the humiliation. It was the death of the respect I had for my parents. It was the cold, hard realization that the family they were protecting didn't include me. The final shattering blow came a year later. I had worked all through high school, at a grocery store, a landscaping company, a movie theater, saving every penny for my education. I had a decent college fund saved up, about $15,000. It was my pride and joy, my ticket out. A month before I was supposed to leave for architecture school, my parents sat me down for another family meeting. Leo, now a two-time college dropout, had an incredible business idea, a revolutionary new coffee shop that would also be an art gallery. He just needed some seed money. They asked to borrow my entire college fund. They swore up and down it was a solid investment, that I'd get it all back with interest before my second semester tuition was due. "This is his big chance, Samuel," my mother said, her eyes shining with a desperate, misplaced faith. "This could be the thing that finally sets him on the right path. He has a vision." I knew, with the certainty of a condemned man, that I would never see that money again. But how do you say no? I was 17. They were my parents. The pressure was immense. I remember trying to protest, my voice small. "But that's for my tuition." My mother's face immediately crumpled. "Oh, Samuel, don't you want to see your brother succeed? After all we've done." I gave them the money. The coffee shop, predictably, went bankrupt in 6 months, leaving a trail of unpaid bills and angry vendors. The loan was never mentioned again. I took out student loans. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs through all 4 years of architecture school. I ate more ramen noodles and cheap pasta than any human should. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt. My debt, my responsibility. As always, college wasn't just an education. It was my liberation. For the first time in my life, I was just Samuel, not Leo's little brother. I was the guy who was always in the design studio, the one who could solve a complex structural problem at 3 a.m. I thrived on the anonymity and the pure, unadulterated meritocracy. My success depended only on my own hard work, and I discovered I loved that feeling. After graduation, I landed a junior position at a small but respected architecture firm in a city 3 hours away from my hometown. It was a deliberate choice. I needed the distance. I kept my head down and worked. While my friends were going out and traveling, I was in the office on weekends, taking on extra projects, learning everything I could. While they were taking vacations, I was studying for my grueling licensing exams. My life was a quiet, disciplined, solitary climb. I methodically paid off my student loans, and each payment felt like buying back a small piece of my own life. I moved from a tiny apartment with a leaky faucet to a slightly less tiny one with a window that got morning sun. I never asked my family for a single dime. Our relationship settled into a comfortable, if hollow, distance, maintained by short, superficial phone calls and obligatory appearances at Thanksgiving and Christmas. They never asked about the specifics of my work. To them, my stable career was just Samuel being Samuel. Reliable, predictable, boring. Meanwhile, Leo's life was a constant, chaotic whirlwind of failed startups, new passions, and dramatic crises, each one meticulously funded and managed by my parents. The decision to buy a house grew quietly inside me over years. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about claiming territory. It was about building something with my own 2 hands, metaphorically speaking, that nobody could touch, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I'd never been allowed to have. I wanted a place where the only expectations I had to meet were my own. I spent months on the search. I met with a real estate agent, Maria, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who seemed to understand what I was looking for, without me having to explain the deep-seated psychological need behind it. I told her I wanted quiet, privacy, and good bones. When she showed me this place, a modest two-bedroom bungalow on a tree-lined street with a big, slightly overgrown backyard for my dog, Max, I knew instantly. Felt solid. Felt peaceful. Felt like mine. The mortgage process was a bureaucratic nightmare, a mountain of paperwork and proof, but I climbed it alone. I drained my savings account for the down payment, every dollar a testament to a late night worked or a weekend given up. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want their opinions, their suggestions, or their inevitable attempts to get involved and take credit. I wanted this one thing to be purely and completely mine. The day Maria handed me the keys was one of the single best days of my life. I walked through the empty rooms, the sound of my footsteps echoing, Max trotting happily at my heels, and I felt a sense of profound peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing my entire life. For the first time, I felt I had a place in the world that was undeniably, irrevocably my own. And so, we come back to the present. To me, standing in my living room, watching my brother stake his claim on my sanctuary. Every memory, every sacrifice, every lonely night spent working towards this single goal, it all coalesced into a single, cold point of clarity in my chest. He wasn't just trying to take a room in my house. He was trying to take the one thing I had ever built entirely for myself. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the very bone, that I could not let that happen. Not this time. Never again. The next day at work was a blur. I'm an architect. I spend my days designing spaces, defining boundaries, creating order and function out of chaos. But my own space, my own boundaries, had been breached with such contemptuous ease it felt like they were made of mist. All day, Leo's words echoed in my head on a relentless loop. I'll move in this weekend. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was something I couldn't wrap my mind around. I tried to rationalize. He's not serious. It's just Leo being Leo, making a grand, dramatic statement he has no intention of following through on. But a deep, cold dread in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. Leo always followed through on the things that benefited him. I left work early, my anxiety a buzzing live wire under my skin. Every red light felt like an eternity. As I turned onto my street, my heart hammering against my ribs, I saw it. A beat-up, rusty moving van parked at my curb, its side emblazoned with a faded Rent Me logo. My blood ran cold. Two guys were carrying a ridiculously ornate-looking dresser down the ramp, the kind of flashy, overpriced piece of furniture Leo would buy on credit instead of paying his rent. And there he was, on my brand new lawn, which I'd mowed for the first time just 2 days prior, directing them with an imperious wave of his hand. He was on his phone, laughing about something, one foot propped up on the bumper of the van. He looked up, saw my car pull in, and gave me a casual, infuriating wave, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. As if he hadn't just driven a bulldozer through the one safe place I had on this earth. I got out of my car, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. Max, my golden retriever, whined softly from the passenger seat, his big brown eyes full of confusion. He could feel the storm coming. I walked up the driveway, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. Leo, I said. My voice was dangerously calm, devoid of all emotion. What is this? He clicked off his phone, pocketing it with a smug air. Hey, Sammy, just getting a head start on the weekend. Beat the rush. He gestured with his thumb towards the house. Gotta say, the afternoon light in that spare room is actually pretty great. Going to be a perfect spot for my workspace. He started to walk past me towards the front door, which was propped wide open. My home. Violated. The two movers trudged past me carrying a large box crudely labeled, Leo's important stuff. I felt a surge of pure, white-hot adrenaline. A wave of anger so intense it almost made me dizzy. I moved, planting myself directly in front of him, blocking the path to the door. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was as solid as a block of granite. He stopped, his easy smile faltering for a fraction of a second. No? What do you mean, no? I mean, no, you are not moving in here. This is my house. I bought it. With my money. From my job. You are not living here. Each word was a carefully placed stone in the wall I was building between us. He actually laughed. A short, condescending puff of air that was pure dismissal. Sammy, don't be so dramatic. It's not a big deal. Mom already explained it. You have the space, I need a place. Family helps family. It's simple math. This isn't math, Leo. This is my life. And you don't get to just decide to be a part of it whenever it's convenient for you and your latest failure. His face hardened. The charming, easygoing mask slipped, and for a second, I saw the petulant, entitled child underneath. You're being selfish. You know that? You've always been the selfish one. You have all this. He gestured vaguely at the house, at my car, at my life. And you can't spare a little for your own brother? After everything Mom and Dad have done for you? For us. The spectacular, galactic irony of that statement was so thick I could have choked on it. I just stared at him, my mind short-circuiting. He took my stunned silence as a victory. He shouldered past me, a deliberate, aggressive bump, and walked into my house. Just put the dresser in the second bedroom on the right. Guys, he called out to the movers. And be careful with it. It's Italian. I stood alone on my own driveway, a trespasser at my own front door, and listened as my brother began to rearrange my life. I didn't follow him inside. Couldn't. If I had, I would have either ended up in a screaming match or in jail. I knew from a lifetime of bitter experience that arguing with Leo was a battle I could never win. In my family, the loudest, most emotional person always won. Logic was irrelevant. Facts were inconvenient. And that was never me. Instead, I got back in my car, with Max whining anxiously in the seat next to me, and I drove. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move, to feel the engine vibrating, to put distance between myself and the hostile takeover happening in my home. I ended up in the nearly empty parking lot of a public park a few miles away. I pulled into a space facing a small lake, cut the engine, and rested my forehead against the cool plastic of the steering wheel. My whole body was trembling with a rage that had no outlet. It was a poison with no antidote. After a few minutes of just breathing in and out, trying to get my heart rate back to something resembling normal, I did the only sane thing I could think to do. I called David. David has been my best friend since kindergarten. We built forts in his backyard, we survived the social jungle of high school together, and he was the one who talked me through the worst, most desperate nights in college when the weight of my student loans and my 2 jobs felt like it was going to physically crush me. Now, he was a lawyer. A damn good one, specializing in contract and property law. He picked up on the second ring. Hey man, what's up? You sound terrible. He knew my voice that well. I opened my mouth, but what came out was a strangled, pathetic noise. Samuel? You there? You okay? His voice sharpened with concern. I took a shaky breath. He's moving in, Dave. Leo. He's at my house right now with a damn moving van. He's moving his stuff into my house as we speak. There was a moment of profound, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, are you kidding me? Please tell me you're kidding. Did you agree to this? No, of course not. I came home from work and he was just there, acting like he owned the place. He said Mom told him it was fine. He said, and I quote, family helps family. I heard David let out a long, slow, frustrated breath. It was the sound of him shifting from concerned friend mode into methodical lawyer mode. Okay, Samuel, listen to me, and listen very carefully. This is not a family squabble anymore. This is a legal issue. Is your name the only one on the deed to that house? The only name on the mortgage? Yes, 100%. Of course. Did you, at any point, verbally or in writing, invite him to live there, even temporarily? No. I explicitly told him he couldn't just now. Good, David said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through my panic. Then he is trespassing. Legally, right now, he is an unwanted guest on your private property. Your silence, your walking away from the confrontation. They will interpret that as permission. You need to be unequivocal. Do not let him establish residency. Not for one night. That complicates things. What do I do, Dave? If I go back there, it's just going to be a huge fight. My mom will get involved. My dad will just stand there and look disappointed in me. It's the same old playbook. I know, he said, his voice softening with a sympathy that almost made me break down. I know what they're like. I've been watching them do this to you for 25 years. But you have rights here, man. Real legal rights. First thing tomorrow morning, you're calling a locksmith. You're changing every single lock on that house. Front door, back door, garage, everything. Second, his property. He moved it in without your permission. You have the right to have it removed. He paused, letting his words sink in. Look, I know this is hard. This goes against every fiber of your being, everything they've trained you to be. They've conditioned you to absorb, to give in, to be the shock absorber for Leo's chaotic life. But that house, Samuel, that house is your line in the sand. If you let them take this from you, they will never, ever stop. You will be funding and housing your delinquent brother for the rest of his life. He was right. Every single word hit me like a physical blow, because it was the unvarnished, brutal truth. This wasn't just about a spare room. This was about the next 40 years of my life. The conversation with David was like a splash of ice water to the face. It washed away the emotional fog of anger and helplessness and left behind a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. It was time to stop being the family shock absorber. It was time to draw the line. In concrete. Just as I was steeling my resolve, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed a name I recognized with a familiar sense of dread. Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She was the family's designated peacekeeper, which was a polite euphemism for her role as my mother's chief lieutenant in all matters of emotional manipulation and guilt-tripping. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I knew talking to her would be like willingly drinking poison, but I also knew that ignoring her would just lead to more calls, and then frantic calls from my mother asking why I was being so rude to my aunt. It was a trap, and the only way out was through. I swiped to answer. Samuel, honey, it's your Aunt Carol. Her voice was like warm honey, thick and sweet and designed to suffocate you. Your mother called me. She's so worried about you, dear. She said you were a little unwelcoming to poor Leo today. Aunt Carol? I said, my voice as flat and uninviting as a concrete slab. He hired a moving van and started moving into my house without asking my permission. Oh, I know, dear, and maybe his methods were a little clumsy, a bit overeager, but his heart is in the right place. You know how much he looks up to you, how proud he is of your success. And he's just going through such a tough time right now. Another one of his brilliant business ideas fell through, the poor thing. He just needs a soft place to land for a little while. Your mother thought, well, we all thought you'd be happy to help. It's what families do, after all. Every word was a carefully crafted, poison-tipped dart of guilt. The poor thing. The soft place to land. The unsubtle implication that I was the cold, heartless one for not immediately laying down my life as a doormat. This was twist number one for me, though it felt less like a twist and more like a confirmation of a grim reality. My aunt wasn't a neutral party trying to broker peace. She was an active, willing participant in this toxic family machine. I have to go, Aunt Carol, I said, and hung up before she could unleash another volley. My hands were shaking. I needed to know how this all started. How did they even find me? I had been so meticulously careful. I scrolled through my contacts and my finger paused over one name. Mark, my cousin, Aunt Carol's son. He was a few years younger than me, and we'd always gotten along reasonably well. He was the only one in the entire extended family to whom I had casually mentioned my house search months ago. I'd never given him the address, but he knew the general area I was looking in. With a sinking feeling, I called him. He sounded nervous the moment he heard my voice. Hey, Samuel. Man, what's up? Mark, I need you to be honest with me, right now. Did you tell my parents where I live? There was a long, damning pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the sound of cowardice. Yeah. Man, I'm so sorry. Aunt Eleanor called me last week. She said they were all so worried about you. that you'd been distant and they didn't know where you were. She was crying, man. She just wanted to know if you were okay. I didn't think it was a big deal. I just told her the street name. I figured you'd already told them yourself. Twist number 2. Betrayal. It was a sharp, bitter pill to swallow. He hadn't done it out of malice, I knew. He'd done it to stay in my mother's good graces, to keep the family peace. The same sick, twisted peace that was always maintained at my direct expense. It was a big deal, Mark, I said quietly, the words feeling heavy and final. I ended the call. That was it. That was the final push I needed. The conversation with David gave me the legal logic, but the calls with my aunt and cousin gave me the emotional fuel. They had all conspired, in their own weak and manipulative ways, to corner me. They had left me with no allies, no room to maneuver. And in doing so, they had made my decision for me. I put the car in drive and headed back towards my house. Not to argue, not to negotiate, but to plan. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my entire life, I was going to be the one holding the lightning. I didn't go home right away. Couldn't. I spent that night on David's couch, the cushions lumpy and unfamiliar. I barely slept. The thought of being in my own house with Leo there, his entitled presence seeping into the walls like a toxic mold, was unbearable. I woke up the next morning before the sun, feeling a cold, clear purpose settled deep in my gut. The swirling storm of anger and confusion from the day before had passed. In its place was a landscape of stark, unshakable resolve. There was only a sequence of tasks to be completed. The first call I made was at 8:01 a.m., the moment the business opened. Good morning, Maple Grove Locksmiths. Hello, I said, my voice perfectly steady. I need a complete lock replacement for a residential property. Front door, back door, and the door leading into the garage. When is your earliest availability? As luck would have it, they had a cancellation. They could be there by 10. Perfect. The second call was to a company I found online with excellent reviews. Fresh Start Hauling and Storage. I explained the situation briefly and clinically, stripping it of all emotion. There is property in my home that does not belong to me and was moved in without my consent. I need it removed and taken to a secure storage unit. Can you handle that today? The man on the phone was professional and discreet. They could be there by noon. They would pack everything, move it, and I could pay for the first month of storage online. The key to the unit would be mailed to my brother at my parents' address. It was a small concession to civility in an otherwise brutal act. Also perfect. I arrived at my house at 9:45 a.m. Leo's car was gone. He was probably out for a run or holding court at some coffee shop, blissfully unaware of the tectonic shift that was about to occur. The house was quiet, but it felt deeply wrong. A ridiculously expensive leather jacket of his was slung over one of my simple dining chairs. A stack of his pretentious magazines was on my clean, minimalist coffee table. It was a quiet occupation, subtle but pervasive, and it had to be eradicated. The locksmith, a quiet, efficient man with tattooed knuckles, arrived exactly on time. He didn't ask any questions, just got to work. I stood by and watched him methodically dismantle the old locks, the ones my family had already violated. The high-pitched whine of his drill was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. With each old lock that clattered into his metal tray, I felt a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. When he was done, he handed me a set of 2 brand new, gleaming keys. They felt heavy and powerful in my hand. They weren't just pieces of metal. They were a statement, a declaration of sovereignty. At noon sharp, the hauling company arrived. 2 strong, stoic guys with a big, empty truck. I walked them through the house, pointing. Everything in the spare bedroom, I said. That Italian dresser, those boxes, the jacket on that chair, the magazines on the table. Anything that you didn't see in this house 2 days ago. They worked with an impersonal efficiency that I was grateful for. There was no malice in it, no anger. It was a sterile, necessary procedure, like a surgeon removing a tumor. I watched as they carried out the flashy dresser, the boxes of clothes, the small monuments to my brother's boundless entitlement. And with each item that crossed the threshold and left my house, The air inside grew lighter, cleaner. The space started to feel like mine again. When they finally drove away, leaving a receipt for the storage unit in my hand, I walked through the now silent house. It was empty of him. I moved my dining chair back to its rightful place. I wiped down the coffee table. I swept the floor where his boxes had been. It was my house again. I had taken it back. The physical boundary was reestablished. Now all that was left was to defend it. With the house secured and purged, I had a few hours before I expected Leo to return and discover he was locked out. My mind was racing, but I felt a strange sense of profound calm. The adrenaline from the morning's decisive actions had faded, leaving behind a quiet, unshakable resolve. I decided to head to the bank to deposit a check and get some paperwork sorted out for my new mortgage. I needed to focus on something normal, something mundane, to ground myself. The bank was quiet, with the gentle hum of computers and the soft murmur of conversations. As I stood in line, I heard a familiar, chirpy voice. "Samuel? Oh my goodness, is that you?" I turned. It was Sarah, a woman who had worked at this branch for as long as I could remember. She had gone to high school with my mother and was one of those small-town people who seemed to be a central node in the local gossip network. "Hey Sarah, how are you?" I said, managing a polite smile. "I'm good, hon. It's so good to see you. I heard through the grapevine you bought a place over on Elm Street. Congratulations. That's wonderful news," she said, her voice genuinely warm. "Thanks," I said, a little surprised the news had traveled that far and that fast already. She leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Well, I'm just so glad one of the kids is doing well. I see your parents in here from time to time, and oh, they just look so stressed out. Your father especially. All that trouble with Leo's business. It's just such a shame." A little alarm bell went off in the back of my head. Trouble? I just heard his coffee shop idea didn't really pan out. Sarah's eyes widened a bit, and she put a hand to her mouth as if she realized she'd said too much. "Oh, well, just the usual stuff. It's so hard starting a business these days." But her hesitation, the quick glance around the bank, spoke volumes. It wasn't the usual stuff. There was something more. It must have been a significant loss for them to be that stressed. I prodded gently, keeping my tone casual. She bit her lip, looking around again. "Well, I really shouldn't say, but between you and me, they had to take out a second mortgage on their house a few months back. A big one. I just hope they can keep up with the payments." She patted my arm sympathetically. "Anyway, it's none of my business. I'm just so glad to see you thriving. You take care now." She bustled away to her teller window, leaving me standing there, my mind reeling. A second mortgage. A big one. Suddenly, the disparate pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture that was far uglier and more desperate than I had ever imagined. Their frantic push to install Leo in my house wasn't just about their usual pattern of entitlement and favoritism. It was about something much, much bigger. That casual, gossipy remark from Sarah was the stray thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew with chilling certainty that my family's invasion of my home wasn't just an act of arrogance. It was an act of sheer desperation, and that made them far more dangerous. The rest of the week was defined by a silence that was both eerie and ominous. I had braced myself for a barrage of angry calls from Leo the moment he found the locks changed, but my phone remained quiet. There were no furious texts, no sputtering voicemails. This wasn't like him. Leo thrived on drama and immediate, explosive confrontation. This silence was tactical. It was the quiet of an army regrouping, planning a more coordinated, full-scale assault. I knew they were waiting for Sunday. Sunday arrived gray and overcast, the sky a heavy, bruised blanket that mirrored the anxious anticipation in my chest. I spent the morning cleaning, organizing, making my space feel even more like my own. Every polished surface, every straightened picture frame, every neatly folded towel was a small act of defiance. My dog, Max, stayed glued to my side, his warm presence a comforting anchor in the tense stillness. He knew something was coming. Just before noon, it began. The familiar sedan pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel with an assertive sound. But this time, another car, a newer, shinier SUV, pulled in right behind it. My Aunt Carol's car. They were bringing reinforcements. A war council. I watched from the living room window as they all got out. My mother, my father, Leo, and Aunt Carol. They walked up to the front door not as a family visiting, but as a delegation arriving to negotiate a surrender. My surrender. I heard the distinct sound of a key scratching uselessly against the new, unfamiliar lock. A pause. Another, more forceful try. Then, Leo's voice, sharp and laced with frustration. He changed the damn locks. What? My mother's shriek was so shrill I could hear it clearly through the thick, solid wood of the door. Then came the knocking. First, a polite, hesitant rap from my father. Then, a more insistent, rhythmic pounding from Leo. Finally, my mother found the doorbell and began pressing it over and over and over again. A frantic, piercing sound designed to unnerve me, to force me out. I let them wait. I stood in my hallway, counting to 60 twice. I let the silence be my first response. I needed them to understand, from the very beginning, that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. I was no longer playing on their field by their rules. This was my home, my territory, my terms. Finally, I walked to the door, took a deep, centering breath, and opened it. They all stood there on my porch, a gallery of outraged and disbelieving faces. "What is the meaning of this, Samuel?" my mother demanded immediately, her voice trembling with indignation as she tried to push past me into the entryway. I held my ground and didn't move an inch. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You can come in, but we are going to have a civil conversation. In the living room, like adults." The sheer, unadulterated novelty of that concept seemed to stun them into a momentary compliance. They filed in, their body language stiff and hostile. They arranged themselves on my couch, a united front of familial judgment. My father, predictably, took the armchair in the corner, already receding into the wallpaper, a ghost at his own son's execution. My mother began. It was a well-rehearsed, tear-filled monologue. It was about family, about duty, about all the sacrifices they had made for me. A list I found shockingly short and inaccurate. It was about how I had become cold, ungrateful, and selfish. Aunt Carol chimed in with her syrupy, poisonous phrases about the importance of forgiveness and my sacred responsibility to help my less fortunate brother in his time of need. "Family is all we have, Samuel," she cooed, a statement that felt more like a threat than a comfort. Leo sat there between them, a smug, martyred look on his face, playing the part of the wronged victim to perfection. "I just can't believe you do this, Sammy," he said, shaking his head slowly, his voice thick with fake hurt. "Throw my stuff out on the street. Treat me like some kind of criminal. After everything I'm going through." They genuinely thought this was an intervention, a moment to correct my aberrant behavior, to shame me back into my designated box. They had absolutely no idea that the person they were talking to was not the same person they had raised. The boy who took the blame and gave away his future was gone. In his place stood a man who had finally found his spine. I let them finish. I let all the accusations, all the guilt, all the manipulation hang in the air, filling the room with their toxic energy. And when they were finally done, when all their ammunition was spent and they looked at me expectantly, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at them one by one, letting the silence build. I let that silence stretch, coiling it tighter and tighter in the room until it became uncomfortable. My mother shifted on the couch, her hands twisting a handkerchief. My aunt cleared her throat, her placid smile looking strained. Leo's smug expression began to waver, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it was so full of cold, hard clarity that it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "You're done? Good. Because you're right, we do need to talk. But we're not going to talk about my supposed responsibilities. We're going to talk about the truth." I leaned forward and placed a thin manila folder on the coffee table. It was mostly for dramatic effect, containing public property records I had printed out from the county website, but the impact was immediate. For pairs of eyes locked onto it as if it were a bomb. "I don't think you're here because you're worried about me being lonely in a big house," I began, looking directly at my mother, holding her gaze until she looked away. "And I don't think you're here just because Leo needs a place to crash while he gets back on his feet." I paused, letting the weight of my unspoken accusation sink into the room. "I think you're here because you're desperate. I think you're here because you took out a $250,000 second mortgage on your house to bail Leo out of his latest 5-alarm disaster." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from my mother's and father's faces in unison. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father looked like he had been physically punched in the gut, all the air leaving his body in a silent whoosh. Aunt Carol looked utterly bewildered, glancing between my parents and me as if watching a tennis match where one player had suddenly pulled out a gun. Only Leo's expression shifted from smugness to pure, unadulterated fury. He knew he'd been exposed. "I think," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word of truth, "that Leo's so-called business didn't just fail. I think it failed spectacularly. And I think the creditors are calling. And I think you're about to lose your house. The house I grew up in. The home you systematically sacrificed for your golden boy." There was a dead, suffocating silence. The truth was out, ugly and undeniable, sitting in the center of my living room like an unexploded bomb. "So this whole plan," I said, gesturing from Leo to the walls of my house. "This whole ambush wasn't about family helping family. It was a desperate, pathetic Hail Mary. You were going to move Leo in here, establish him as a resident, and then apply relentless emotional pressure on me until I either let you all live here or co-signed a loan to save your house. You were going to try and attach my salary, my credit, my future to your sinking ship." "That's not true," my mother finally whispered, but her voice held no conviction. It was the weak, reflexive protest of a cornered animal. Right at that exact moment, as if choreographed by a divine force of cosmic justice, the doorbell rang. The sound made everyone jump. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Excuse me, I have a guest." I walked to the door and opened it. Standing on my porch was Mr. Harrison, the CEO of my firm. He was an imposing, impeccably dressed man in his 60s, exuding an aura of quiet power and success. I had invited him over on the pretext of showing him some preliminary designs for a major project at my home office. He had no idea he was walking into a family implosion, but his timing was perfect. "Mr. Harrison, please, come in," I said, my voice now full of professional warmth and confidence. He stepped inside, his sharp eyes briefly taking in the tense, bizarre tableau on my couch before focusing on me. "Samuel, good to see you. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, sir," I said, leading him further into the room. I turned to my stunned, silent family. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my boss, Mr. Harrison. He's the CEO of Harrison Architectural Group." I then turned back to him. "Sir, this is my family. My mother, Eleanor, my father, Richard, my Aunt Carol, and my brother Leo." Mr. Harrison gave them a polite, firm nod. "A pleasure." He then looked back at me, a warm, genuine smile on his face. "Samuel was just telling me on Friday about the board's enthusiasm for his work. We're discussing the potential for his early promotion to lead architect on the new coastal resort project. He's one of our brightest young talents, and we expect big things from him. The validation, the public acknowledgement of my success, my worth, from this powerful, objective man in front of my family, was the final, devastating blow. It shattered every false narrative they had ever constructed about me. I wasn't the reliable, boring backup plan. I wasn't the family ATM. I was a successful professional, respected by people who mattered, living a life I had built entirely on my own, in spite of them. The air went out of them. Their attack, their entitlement, their whole warped worldview, collapsed in on itself in that single, excruciating, silent moment. They had come to my house to put me back in my place. Instead, they had been forced to confront their own catastrophic self-inflicted failure. The checkmate was silent, and it was absolute. Mr. Harrison was an incredibly perceptive man. He could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating enough to be a physical presence. After a few more moments of polite but palpably strained small talk about the housing market, he clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of both support and a clear exit strategy. "Well, Samuel, I can see you have family matters to attend to. Just send the final drafts for the resort over to my office on Monday morning. I look forward to seeing them." "Of course, sir. Thank you again for stopping by," I said, walking him to the door, grateful for his unwitting role in this drama. When I closed the door behind him, the silence he left in his wake was heavier and more profound than anything that had been said all day. I turned back to my family. They looked like statues in a museum exhibit titled Defeat. My mother was staring at her hands in her lap, her face a mask of shocked disbelief. My father was looking at a spot on the floor, his face gray and slack, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Leo was glaring at me, his eyes filled with a helpless, venomous rage. The charming, entitled golden boy had vanished, replaced by a cornered, bitter man. There was nothing left to say. There were no more arguments to be made, no more manipulations to deploy. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no lie big enough to cover it up. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, my father pushed himself up from the armchair. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He just walked to the door and opened it, holding it for the others like a silent usher. My mother and Aunt Carol followed, their shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. They looked small. Leo was the last to stand. He took a single, menacing step towards me, his fists clenched at his sides. For a terrifying second, I thought he might actually try something physical, a final, desperate act of dominance. But he didn't. The fight was gone. He just looked at me, his face twisted with a toxic mix of hatred and something that almost looked like bewilderment, as if he genuinely couldn't comprehend a world in which he didn't get what he wanted. Then, he turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard that a picture on the wall rattled. I stood there in the absolute silence of my living room, listening to their car doors slam, the engines start, and the sound of their tires fade away down the street. There was no feeling of triumph. There was no satisfying rush of victory. There was just a vast, hollow emptiness, a profound sadness for the family I wished I had, and the sober, painful acceptance of the one I actually did. I had won the battle, but it felt like I had lost the war. I had closed a door, and I knew, with an absolute gut-wrenching certainty, that it could never be reopened. CTA. This was the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are incredible. If you could, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. That evening, the house was quieter than it had ever been. It was a heavy, weighted silence, the kind that follows a massive explosion, when all the dust is settling. I fed Max, made myself a sandwich that I stared at but didn't eat, and just sat on the couch, replaying the afternoon in my head. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. The screen lit up with my mother's name. A part of me wanted to just throw the phone against the wall. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. I knew she would keep calling, her desperation escalating with each unanswered ring. With a sigh of deep exhaustion, I picked it up. "Samuel?" Her voice was completely different. The sharp, commanding, indignant tone was gone. In its place was a broken, pleading whisper I had never heard before. "Samuel, please. We need to talk." "We did talk, Mom," I said, my voice flat and tired. "No, that wasn't right. What you said, is it really true? About their house? The money? You know it's true. You were there when the papers were signed." I heard her take a ragged, shuddering breath, and then she started to cry. It wasn't the manipulative, theatrical crying I had been subjected to my whole life. This was the raw, ugly, hiccuping sound of genuine despair. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed into the phone. "Your father, he won't even look at me. He's just sitting in his chair, staring at the wall. And Leo is gone. After we got home, he just packed a bag and left. He screamed at us, said this was all our fault. We don't know where he went." The old Samuel, the boy they had raised to be the family fixer, would have crumbled. He would have immediately started thinking of solutions. How can I help? What can I do? Maybe I can loan them some money. Maybe I can talk to Leo. But I wasn't that person anymore. That person had died in my living room that afternoon. "I'm sorry you're going through that, Mom," I said, and to my surprise, I realized I meant it. I was sorry. I wouldn't wish that kind of pain and fear on anyone. But this is not my problem to solve. "But you're our son," she cried, a hint of the old, familiar indignation creeping back into her voice. "We're your family. You can't just turn your back on us when we're in trouble." "You turned your back on me a long time ago, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "You did it when you let me take the blame for a hit and run. You did it when you took my college fund and let my future go into debt. And you did it this week when you tried to take my home. You didn't want a son. You wanted a safety net for Leo." I let that brutal truth sink in, the silence on the other end of the line filled only by her ragged sobs. "I love you, Mom," I said, and that was true, too, in its own twisted, complicated way. "But I cannot and will not be destroyed by you. I can't fix this. You and Dad and Leo have to face the consequences of your own choices. For once, I need peace. I need to live my own life." She was just sobbing now, incoherent pleas and broken words. "Goodbye, Mom," I said gently. Then I ended the call. I opened my phone's contact list. I found her name, tapped on it, and scrolled down to the bottom. Block. I did the same for my father, for Leo, for Aunt Carol, for Mark. One by one, I severed the digital lines of communication. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. It was the final, satisfying click of the lock on my new life. The next 6 months were the quietest, most peaceful, and most intensely productive of my entire life. The silence from my family was absolute and complete. It was a strange sensation at first. For weeks, I would feel a phantom buzz in my pocket or tense up when a car that looked like theirs drove down my street. But there was nothing. It was like a constant, low-grade, staticky noise I had lived with my whole life. A noise I hadn't even been fully conscious of, had suddenly been switched off. And in that profound silence, I began to hear myself think, to feel my own feelings, for the very first time. At work, freed from the constant background anxiety of my family's next impending crisis, I was on fire. I poured all of my newfound energy and focus into the coastal resort project. My designs were bold, innovative, and deeply personal. Mr. Harrison was more than impressed. He was ecstatic. 3 months after that terrible, liberating Sunday, he called me into his office. Julian, my ambitious and perpetually sneering colleague, watched me go with a sour look on his face, no doubt expecting me to be reprimanded. "Samuel," Mr. Harrison said, getting straight to the point as he always did, "the board loved your proposal. They said it was the most exciting work they've seen in a decade. We're officially green-lighting the project. And we want you to be the lead architect. The promotion is effective immediately. It comes with a significant salary increase, a corner office, and a whole new level of responsibility. Do you think you're ready for it?" I was stunned into a momentary silence. It was everything I had been working towards for years, a goal that had often felt impossibly distant. "Yes, sir," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I am." I shook his hand, my mind reeling. I had done it, not because of my family, but in spite of them. I had built this success on my own terms. My life settled into a new, peaceful, and fulfilling rhythm. I worked hard, but I no longer worked to escape. I worked because I loved it. I came home every evening to my quiet, orderly house. I took Max for long walks in the nearby park, throwing his favorite tennis ball until my arm ached. I reconnected with old friends from college, the ones I had let drift away because I was always too busy or too emotionally exhausted. I started dating someone, a kind, intelligent, and funny woman named Clara who was a landscape designer. She loved my house, and when she looked at the overgrown backyard, she didn't see a mess. She saw potential. Together, we started planning a garden, sketching out ideas for a stone patio and a vegetable patch. My house slowly stopped being a fortress I had to defend and started to feel like a home I was excited to share. I heard snippets of news about my family through David, whose mother was still hopelessly entangled in the local gossip network. The news was grim. They had lost the house. It had been sold in a foreclosure auction for less than they owed. They had moved into a small, cramped, rented apartment on the other side of town. Leo had apparently surfaced somewhere in Florida, working some cash-in-hand job at a beach bar, but no one had heard from him directly. The most shocking news was about my father. He had been forced out of his comfortable retirement and was now working as a greeter at a big-box store to make ends meet. The image of my proud, silent father forced to say, "Welcome to Megamart," 1,000 times a day sent a pang of sadness through me, but it was a distant sadness, like hearing about a tragedy in a foreign country you've never visited. It was their story, not mine. My story was here, within the walls I had fought for, with the wonderful woman planting a garden in my yard, with the life I was building, one happy, peaceful, and gloriously ordinary day at a time. I was finally completely free. One Tuesday evening in early spring, I came home from work to find a single, plain white envelope in my mailbox, tucked between a utility bill and a catalog. There was no return address. My name and address were written on the front in a familiar, shaky script that I hadn't seen in years. It was my father's handwriting. My first visceral instinct was to tear it in half and throw it in the recycling bin. I had built such a peaceful, happy life by cutting them out. Why would I willingly invite the chaos, the guilt, the pain, back in? But curiosity, and perhaps a lingering, buried sliver of something that felt like hope, made me take it inside. I placed it on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time, as if it were a venomous snake. Max came over and nudged my hand with his wet nose, sensing my turmoil. Finally, I took a deep breath, tore it open, and unfolded the 3 pages inside. It wasn't a plea for help, or an angry tirade, or a guilt trip. It was a confession. "Samuel," it began, "I am not writing this to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it, and I don't deserve it. I am writing because, for the first time in your life, you deserve the whole truth. I have been a coward for 35 years, Samuel, and my cowardice has cost you more than I can ever repay." He went on to explain everything, filling in the dark, ugly gaps in the story. Twist number 3, the final, brutal truth, was so much worse than I had imagined. Leo's coffee shop hadn't just failed because of mismanagement. He had taken on private investors, old friends of our parents, promising them huge returns. He had used that money not for the business but to fund a severe gambling addiction. The $250,000 second mortgage wasn't just to cover business losses. It was to pay off dangerous, violent loan sharks who had threatened to physically hurt Leo. "Your mother has always seen him as a fragile genius who just needed one big break," my father wrote, his handwriting growing more erratic. "But he is not. He is a con man, parasite. He has been manipulating us and you since he was a child. The car accident you took the blame for? He was drunk, Samuel. Not just a beer or two. He was blind drunk. He could have gone to jail for years for a felony DUI. We covered it up. I helped cover it up." The letter was a devastating catalog of a lifetime of lies, of cover-ups, of my parents desperately enabling a son who was, for all intents and purposes, a sociopath. He wrote about how Eleanor's fierce, blind protection of Leo had become a poison in their marriage, a sickness he was too weak to fight. He admitted that he had stood by silently and watched her sacrifice me on the altar of Leo's ego, time and time again. The day you stood up to all of us in your house was the first time I had seen a man in my family act with true strength and integrity in 30 years, he wrote. I was so ashamed. Not of you. I was bursting with a pride I didn't deserve to feel. I was ashamed of myself. I have enabled this for too long. Your mother and I, we are separated now. We are getting a divorce. I cannot live inside her fantasy world anymore. She still believes Leo is the victim in all of this. But I know the truth. The only victim was you. He ended the letter by saying he didn't expect a reply, that he knew he had lost the right to be my father. He just wanted me to know that someone in my family finally saw me. Truly saw me for who I was. I put the letter down, my hands trembling. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the years of pain, neglect, and sacrifice. But it was something. It was an acknowledgement. It was the truth, finally dragged out into the harsh, cleansing light. And in a strange, unexpected way, it set me free from the last bitter kernel of anger I was holding on to. My father wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man who had finally, at the 11th hour, found the courage to speak. It was 30 years too late, but he had found it. It's been a year now since that Sunday. A year since I got the letter. I never responded to my father. I don't know if I ever will. Some fractures run too deep, the breaks too jagged to ever be set right again. But the anger is gone. The bitterness has dissolved. In its place, there is just a quiet, settled peace. My home is my sanctuary. Clara and I have spent the last year transforming it. The backyard is no longer overgrown. It's a beautiful garden with a stone patio where we have dinner on warm evenings. We planted a vegetable patch, and I discovered the simple, profound joy of eating a tomato that you grew yourself. My house is filled with laughter now, with the smell of good food cooking, with the quiet hum of a life well lived. It's no longer a fortress to be defended. It's a home to be cherished. It's a foundation upon which I've built a new life, a new chosen family of friends and loved ones who respect my boundaries not because they have to, but because they respect me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that 17-year-old boy who gave away his college fund, who took the blame for a crime he didn't commit. I don't feel anger towards him anymore. I just feel a deep, abiding compassion. He did what he had to do to survive in an impossible environment. He learned to be a shock absorber because it was the only way to keep his family from shattering around him. But I've learned the most important lesson of my life. You cannot spend your life absorbing the blows meant for other people. Sooner or later, you will break. Setting a boundary, changing a lock, saying the word no, and meaning it. Those aren't acts of cruelty. They are acts of survival. They are the most profound and necessary acts of self-love. You are not responsible for fixing the people who seem determined to break themselves, especially if they're willing to take you down with them in the process. The door I closed that day wasn't a punishment. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the moment I stopped letting my family write my story and finally picked up the pen myself. And the story I'm writing now, it's a good one. It's a peaceful one. Most importantly, it's mine. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Your voice and your story matters.